And so I have the privilege then of continuing to introduce my fellow panelists, and to moving to our second speaker, who is Yoko Nishimura. She is a specialist in multiple regions, which is a similarity she shares with Liz, who, of course, as we who are attending would know, she's not only an expert in Iran, Iraq, the Elamite world, but also in Neolithic and Bronze Age Turkey, Anatolia. And here, Yoko shows that students even try and outdo their mentors. And so Yoko's expertise is even more dispersed, from Japan to the Near East, or to Japan to Anatolia. And in Japan, her work has been daily use objects, and she has written about the evolution of curved beads, which to me brings to mind the practice that all of us who have been in the field with Liz will recall, and that is her passion and her absolute dedication to recording and interpreting the small finds. And so I'm very pleased to introduce Yoko as an assistant professor at Gettysburg College, who will be speaking not about her work in Japan, but in southeast Turkey at Titriş, Höyük.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for such a kind introduction. Yes, today I would like to talk about my recent research on the material culture from Titriş, Höyük. Okay. The material culture, yes, from Titriş, Höyük. This Titriş, Höyük is located in the southeastern Turkey, near town of Şanlıurfa. I know this excavated here in 1991, way before I came to UCLA, and she opened a, I believe, 5x8 trench in the southern slope of the high mound. Such an important location, but no further excavation has been done in this area so far since her. So it is very important, because it is such an important section of the site. Her trench remained, it's a very important sort of operation at the site. And in so doing, I'd like to talk about economic inequality or equality, both between and within within the houses that are excavated at this site. Because economic inequality, both between and within national boundaries, is one of the most important social issues in the world today. And it's one of the sort of topics that have been sort of very extensively addressed in recent archaeological research from all over the world. In Mesopotamia, in ancient Mesopotamia, at least at a state level community, I think we kind of, it is well understood that at least a two-tiered economic hierarchy existed between elite and non-elite, at least in the third millennium BC, if not earlier. But I was wondering if this dichotomy between elite and non-elite is probably much more complex. It's not a simple dichotomous phenomenon between a small elite group and the rest of the population. So in this study, I compared and contrasted domestic artifacts and pottery assemblages from these 5 excavated houses. And these houses are located in 2 separate residential neighborhoods at this third millennium site of Titriş. Many of the artifacts that I'm going to talk about today are tools for daily household chores and body ornaments, and many of them were stored collectively in courtyards or in small rooms in the back of the houses, these 5 houses. There are 13 houses excavated, but these 5, I'm going to focus on these 5 houses. I'm going to show you these 5 houses later. The examination of these portable household artifacts is combined with the analysis of architectural space from the same houses. So I'm looking at architectural variables as well to assess the disparity of economic or material wealth in terms of their material culture. And I'd like to discuss what the domestic material culture represents in terms of the house occupants' material wealth and economic inequality between these residential buildings. They're occupied about from 2000 300 BC to 2100 BC in early Bronze Age. A geometric mean is calculated from 7 Gini values, which measures the differential accumulation of material wealth. So Gini values I just relied on to sort of measure the economic disparity. The result is in accordance with the expectation that the occupants of these residential structures shared a relatively homogeneous economic status in terms of their household material culture. There are, in recent archaeological studies, they define 3 types of wealth: embodied, relational, and material. These 3 types of wealth are identified as transmissible wealth from generation to generation. And many of the previous analysis, especially in the past 10 years of archaeological studies, of wealth inequality in ancient societies, have tended to center around comparisons between the different settlements or different regions over a long period of time. And this comparative, very large-scale comparative analysis of economic disparity, they primarily utilize the size of residential structure as the indicator of household wealth and inequality. Floor areas, house size, with or without the walls. That's the that's how they base their analysis for their comparative studies. Yes, they when they address the economic inequality between ancient societies, they address the degree and development of material wealth inequality using statistical models. That's a kind of recent tendency, especially the Gini coefficient. In the 3rd millennium Mesopotamia, there aren't so many studies, archaeological studies, that previously that focused on different distribution of material wealth. But recently in 2020, this year, Bassery and Lawrence have published this article that they include sites from the Neolithic to the Iron Ages in southern Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Israel, Palestine, as well as Cyprus. And they were comparing the development and the degree of material wealth inequality using the Gini coefficient. And their methodology also assumes the correlation between house size and household wealth. So that's a kind of proxy. And using the Gini coefficient is sort of getting more and more popular in archaeological studies to assess economic disparity. In ancient Mesopotamia, other previous studies are limited, but for example, Bersasco or Elizabeth Stone, few others have addressed economic inequality in ancient Mesopotamia, northern Mesopotamia. But in some, it appears that they all agree that at least 2 different levels of material wealth, they say elite or non-elite, or wealthy and non-wealthy, at least these 2 tiers commonly existed in urban sites in Bronze Age northern Mesopotamia, in urban sites. So it is often thought that the elite population may have lived near palaces, administrative buildings, and city temples, while the bulk of the city inhabitants may have occupied the rest of the city proper. That's the kind of often thought in northern Mesopotamian urban sites. In the 3rd millennium BC, so there are a number of walled urban centers grew in northern Mesopotamia, and their maximum occupation tends to be around 100 hectares. Titrish was among one of them. It's located here. I don't think you can see my cursor. It's upper Euphrates, north of Kazani Höyük. Titrish Höyük is one of the early early urban centers in northern Mesopotamia in the third millennium. Titriş was among the important thing to remember here is that Titriş is one of the urban centers, but it had a centrally planned construction around 2300 BC. That's how they rebuilt their settlement around this time, although the site had been occupied before 2300 BC, but there is a centrally planned construction of this site that took place around 2300 BC, and this pre-planned nature is seen in the terracing, drainage, and the street system that were established before numerous dwelling structures are built upon or between these systems. So in this A on the left, lower left, and then the B on the upper right on this map are the two extensively excavated areas and where these 5 houses are excavated. Magnetometry surveys also were carried out in this site, and quite extensive surveys that visualized this site that is quite crowded. It's a crowded environment within the habitation quarters during the latest phases of occupation, so which is around 2100 BC. So these 2 excavated areas in black, these are, and in the red circles, these are located at opposite ends of the site, but they contain the houses with very similar material culture. These are the 5 houses that I'm talking about, and 4 of them are from outer town, so it's the kind of upper right section of the site, house 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the one on the bottom is the house unit 5 that comes from the lower town, which is the lower left part section of the site. So these 1, 2, 3, and 4 houses are separated from house 5 into different neighborhoods. These are all built during the centrally planned construction of the settlement around 2300 BC. And house 3, you can see, is a little bit smaller than other houses. So large amounts of diverse household remains from the floor levels of these 5 houses have been corrected. And these levels are floor and situ or superfloor levels, which is within 10 centimeters above the floor level. So I looked at material culture that are excavated in the primary context only. Portable domestic artifacts recovered are mostly stone and metal tools, as you can see here, utensils for food preparation, personal items and ornaments, domestic ceramic containers and terracotta lids, and weaving, spinning, and sewing tools. Exciting. And in this research, a total of 89 artifacts, portable artifacts from the primary flora context. I used these 89. And if they are in fragmentary conditions, I still counted them as whole objects so long as they do not come from the same item. And also I included a total of 50 complete pots that were also from retrieved from the primary flora contexts. On top of that, on top of the complete pots, a large quantity of ceramic shards from the same pottery types was available to be included in this analysis. So I used these pottery shards for my analysis, but before that, back in 2004 and 5, we had to count tens of thousands of shards to include this analysis. And the pottery shards, I used both count and weight for each house, because a large shard count may be attributed to a highly fragmentary condition of a few pots, and whereas the differences in shard weights among lightweight pots, don't mean much, in terms of analysis. So I had to use the pottery shards for their count and weight at the same time. About 17,000 shards are retrieved from the primary floral context. Last summer, I revised my database for the pottery shards, complete ceramic vessels, and other potable artifacts. So clearly, this study is based on the premise that the material remains preserved and excavated from these houses, or from the floor levels of these houses, are not totally random and are to reflect the material culture that was used and abandoned there by the occupants of the houses. So that's the premise. It is expected that the quantitative distribution of material wealth between these houses will show a low degree of economic inequality because previous studies at this site on the architectural, faunal, and floral data have similarly pointed toward little evidence for differential access to wealth and resources. So that's the sort of expectation. Probably my data will show low degree of economic inequality between these houses as well. I used the Gini coefficients, the statistical model, to quantitatively measure the degree of wealth inequality. The Gini coefficient ranges from the lowest value of 0, which represents perfect equality, to the highest value of 1, representing perfect inequality. So I'm expecting something lower, like a 0.2 or 1, 0.1, 0.2, or 0.3, somewhere there for my houses. These are the 8 economic categories, categories of economic variables that I used for this analysis. 4 from the architectural features, and another 4 are from portable material culture. Household, the floor levels, Cotter et al. In 2017, and many others have argued for the use of house size as reliable proxy to measure household wealth in antiquity. So I used, and they based that claim on the extensive archaeological and ethnographic data. I also included courtyard size as one of the material economic variables here, since Stone in 2019 notes the strong correlation between court size and house size at excavated sites in Mesopotamia. Household area with walls, household area without walls among these 5 houses, courtyard area sizes, and the number of rooms. And these are economic variables from the portable material culture. As for the portable household artifacts and pottery shards, the premise is that these artifacts require labor investment by the occupants of the houses, who may have made, procured, maintained, or repaired them while the houses were in use. So the results. Using Stats Direct, I calculated Gini values for these variables within the 5 houses with the confidence level of 95% through bootstrapping. The unbiased estimator of population Ginis show quite low values across the 8 variables, especially for the architectural features, which is between 0.19 and 0.23. Although the overall house area of house 3 is much smaller than other 4 houses, the Gini values remain consistently around 0.2. However, the Gini coefficients for the pottery data are slightly higher, as you can see, 0.26 and 0.40, number 6 and 7 here. And also 8, yes, pottery data. Gini values tend to be higher. The highest Gini value of 0.4 comes from the complete pots. So these are bootstrapping data. The bootstrap gives error ranges to Gini values according to the small sample size 5 houses and the greater confidence level that I selected, which is 95%. It clearly visualizes the Gini measurements of the pottery data being consistently higher than other the value of the rest of the architectural and artifact variables. The arithmetic mean and geometric mean at the bottom of this slide, they are similar, 0.25 and 0.24. Therefore, the result is in accordance with the expectation that the occupants of these houses shared a relatively homogeneous economic status in terms of their household material culture, according to these 8 economic variables. And I believe because these houses were built under the city planning, so the high degree of economic equality in the architectural variables especially, that may simply reflect the uniform allocation of land plots to the dwelling structures at the time of the city planning. Architectural variables may, as such, may obscure disparity in material wealth that may have existed, when these houses were built. On the other hand, the domestic artifacts tend to come from the later phases of occupation, if not the very end of the occupation of these houses. So maybe, the higher values, Gini values for the artifacts is maybe for about 200 years after the central planning of the settlement, it may have allowed a gradual growth in the differential accumulation of domestic artifacts, especially domestic tools and body ornaments. The slightly higher Gini value for the ceramic pots may simply reflect differentiated site formation processes. I believe this is, after when these houses were gradually abandoned, various site formation processes maybe are causing this slightly odd higher Gini values for complete pots. Nevertheless, the overall level of inequality remained low, and it does not show any differences between the geographically separated neighborhoods, either between houses, between neighborhoods. It's nothing. The numbers remain very consistent. I believe, so where are these elite people then? If the non-elite people live side by side at this site, maybe the elite people, elite segment of the inhabitants probably lived near palatial and temple structures, which most likely existed on the high mound. That's the place where Liz excavated. So I hope Liz is willing to continue her operation on the high mound someday to elucidate this very important point. Liz, congratulations. I really don't know how to thank you enough for everything you did for me. Thank you very much for your attention.